In Omega Mansion, wealth was armored. Eleanor Caldwell, the matriarch, designed her safe room to withstand everything: bombs, gas, intruders. But when her body was found, the door was locked from the inside, and the only way out was the truth. Trapped by the blizzard, the 4 suspects, her children, brother and daughter-in-law, all held motives of hatred, fear and greed, and access to the fortress's single weak point, the air Eleanor breathed. This is the story of an impossible murder and the perfect conspiracy that could only be solved by looking at the victim. Prepare to discover how Eleanor's tyranny became the weapon of her own destruction. The air over Lakeshore Haven was thick with the scent of pine and privilege. It was a place where wealth was quiet, measured in acreage and the depth of private security systems. The Caldwell estate, a sprawling modern structure of dark cedar and glass overlooking the frozen lake, stood as the crown jewel of this insulated world. The family had gathered, forced together by the matriarch, to attend the dreaded preliminary reading of Eleanor's revised will, scheduled for Monday morning. The atmosphere was a brittle tension of greed and hostility, amplified overnight by a violent, unexpected blizzard that blanketed the roads, plunging the estate into total isolation. The killer was certainly among the confined. The victim was Eleanor Caldwell, 62, the matriarch, architect of her own success, and CEO of Caldwell Dynamics. Her death was discovered early on a Monday morning, not by a servant, but by her eldest son, Robert. Robert, groomed since birth to inherit the CEO title, found the anomaly first. His mother's custom-built safe room, a fortress within the fortress, designed by Eleanor herself with paranoid precision, was sealed. Its thick steel door, disguised behind a rotating bookcase, was locked, and the triple redundancy system was active. Robert used his emergency override code to gain access, finding Eleanor collapsed by her minimalist steel desk. The initial assessment by local Sheriff Deputy Miller was grim. Eleanor Caldwell was dead. No signs of struggle. No visible wounds. The cause of death was undetermined, pending toxicology. The vital details, however, were immediate and baffling. The safe room was designed to withstand anything from a siege to a chemical attack. It was soundproof, airtight, and had been locked from the inside. Eleanor, meticulous to a fault, always activated the internal lockdown protocols before using the room for her private conference calls. "It's an internal lockdown, detective," reported the security consultant, running diagnostics on the external panel. "She initiated the sequence herself. The room is hermetically sealed. No windows, one door locked, and the ventilation system has triple filtration. Nobody got in and nobody got out." The arrival of Detective Marcus Thorne, flown in from the state police due to the high-profile nature of the case, brought a methodical calm to the chaos. Thorne was an outsider, his worn leather jacket contrasting sharply with the bespoke cashmere and polished wood of the Caldwell home. He surveyed the scene, his focus settling not on the body, but on the room itself. The room was Eleanor's self-made tomb. Thorne ordered the room to remain sealed until forensics could analyze the atmosphere and the state of the complex air filtration system. He then turned his attention to the 4 individuals sequestered in the main living area. The 4 remaining Caldwells, each radiating a potent blend of grief, anxiety, and suppressed calculation. The isolation enforced by the blizzard meant their stories would remain raw and uncoordinated. Thorne moved among the suspects, collecting their initial statements and establishing the chronology of the previous night. Robert Caldwell, 40's eldest son, the apparent heir. He claimed he was in the detached guest house with his wife Victoria, attempting to finalize a major deal before his mother's impending annual board meeting. He emphasized his loyalty and his expectation of inheriting the company. But Thorne noted the tension in Robert's jaw and the slightly frantic look in his eyes, a look that suggested deep, underlying financial distress he was hiding from Eleanor. Motive confirmed. Desperate need for immediate inheritance to cover offshore debts. Victoria Caldwell, 30's Robert's stunningly composed wife. She backed Robert's alibi completely, claiming they were together all evening, reviewing documents. Victoria's beauty was glacial, perfect, But Thorne detected a subtle tremor in her hand as she held a porcelain cup, a sign of fear beneath the surface, fear that her carefully constructed world might collapse. Motive: protecting her social status and ensuring Robert gained the CEO title. Sarah Caldwell, 35, Eleanor's only daughter. A struggling sculptor who had cut ties with the family years ago. She had returned 2 days prior, ostensibly to reconcile, but in reality to hear Eleanor's final public rejection, knowing she was cut out of the will. Sarah claimed she was alone in her childhood room, working late on a commission. She expressed no grief, only a grim sense of finality towards her mother. Motive: intense emotional vengeance for years of cruelty. George Caldwell, 58, Eleanor's younger brother and the company's chief operating officer. George was formal, anxious, and deeply resentful. He had been staying at the estate for business meetings. He claimed he spent the entire evening in his wing, going over financial reports. He confessed that Eleanor was planning to force his retirement, accusing him of sloppy management. Motive: preventing professional and financial ruin. Thorne now had 4 potent, justifiable motives for murder, amplified by the confines of the blizzard. The fundamental problem remained. No one could have entered the safe room. Thorne knew the answer was not in who entered, but in the poison already present in the Caldwell family structure. He realized the true key was still the room itself, the ultimate expression of Eleanor's paranoia and her fatal architecture. The investigation would begin with the method, which would inevitably lead to the shared motive. The silence that followed the initial shock of Eleanor's death was now amplified by the external world. A violent, unexpected blizzard, the kind that shutters Lake Shore Haven for days, had descended overnight. The access roads were impassable, the power was running solely on generators, and the estate was completely cut off. Detective Thorne and his small team were trapped inside with the 9 central figures in the mystery. The isolation was now absolute. The killer was definitely among them. Thorne established an immediate security perimeter, ensuring the 4 family suspects, Robert, Victoria, Sarah, George, remained sequestered. But he also ordered the 5 key household staff to be confined to the main kitchen and staff quarters. The staff, Thorne knew, possessed the daily access and the routine knowledge the family lacked. The staff consisted of Elena, the governess' longtime employee, knew every secret, had endured Eleanor's temper for decades. Javier, the head chef, controlled all food and drink preparation, potential access to toxins. Mark, the IT technician, maintained the mansion's extensive smart home and security systems, knew the architectural flaws better than anyone. David, the personal driver/butler, handled Eleanor's external movements, packages, and communications. Rosa, the cleaner, the true ghost of the house, witness to interactions in every single room. Thorne began his formal interrogation in the mahogany study, the only room with stable light, focusing first on the family, the ones with the most overt motives and most at stake from the will. The blizzard ensures we all stay here, gentlemen. Let's start with the money, Thorne began, his gaze steady on Robert Caldwell, the designated heir. Robert's controlled facade cracked immediately when Thorne presented banking records detailing a massive, rapidly accumulating offshore gambling debt. If Eleanor had discovered this debt before the will reading, a certainty, she would have not only disinherited him, but destroyed him professionally. Robert insisted he was with his wife Victoria all night. Motive confirmed. Desperate financial need for immediate inheritance. Thorne then turned to Sarah Caldwell, the estranged daughter. Her motive was purely emotional. Ms. Caldwell, you admit your relationship with your mother was contentious. Why did you return now, just days before the will reading? Sarah's eyes, usually distant, sharpened with cold pain. Eleanor was a psychological terrorist. She called me back to tell me face to face that she had written me out of the will. Her final act of cruelty. I hated her, detective. But I didn't kill her. Motive confirmed. Intense emotional vengeance. Next was George Caldwell, the chief operating officer. George was nervously pacing. Eleanor suspected I approved minor financial irregularities. She called it sloppy management. She intended to use it as legal leverage to force my retirement without a pension. If she had lived, I would have nothing. Motive confirmed. Professional and financial desperation, fighting for his professional survival. Finally, Victoria Caldwell, the composed wife. Thorne noted her forced calm. Victoria, did Eleanor have any reason to dislike you personally? Victoria denied it until Thorne shifted the conversation to digital communications. Her composure shattered. Tears welled up, confirming Thorne's suspicion. Eleanor had discovered Victoria's discreet, ongoing affair with a family competitor. She said she would expose me at the board meeting, Detective. Not because she cared about infidelity, but because the scandal would humiliate Robert and delay the CEO transfer. She liked controlling us. Motive confirmed. Fear of exposure, protecting her lifestyle and Robert's career. With the family motives established, Thorne's attention shifted to the staff. He knew that any murderer in a locked room had to exploit routine. He interviewed Mark, the young IT technician. Mark confirmed he had installed the final updates on the safe room's proprietary ventilation system just last week. He had the highest level access codes. I know the system better than Mrs. Caldwell did, Detective. But I was in the generator room all night, watching the load against the blizzard. He interviewed Javier, the head chef. Javier confirmed he prepared Eleanor's customary final herbal tea before bed. He was alone in the kitchen until 11 p.m. I handled the teacup, Detective. Nobody else touched it. Thorne now had 9 suspects confined by the snow, for clear motives, and an impossible crime. The solution lay not in finding a suspect who could enter the room, but in understanding how the architecture of the system became the murder weapon. The blizzard was now forcing everyone to reveal their secrets, but the key remained hidden in the cold, impenetrable logic of Eleanor's security. The blizzard raged outside, obscuring the view of Lake Shore Haven and reinforcing the palpable tension inside the mansion. Detective Thorne knew that time was his greatest enemy. The longer the investigation dragged on, the more time the killer had to clean up digital trails or coordinate alibis. The lack of external communication was a double-edged sword. It confined the killer, but it also confined the police. Thorne focused his attention where the crime should have been impossible: the safe room. Forensics, led by Thorne's state police technicians who were trapped with him, confirmed the initial assessment. The room was indeed sealed from the inside. There was no sign of physical entry, no breach of the seals, and the electronic logs showed that only Eleanor's master code had initiated the final lockdown. The cause of death remained mysterious, though preliminary analysis indicated a rapid, systemic failure, inconsistent with a simple heart attack. Thorne spent hours with Mark, the young IT technician, meticulously reviewing the proprietary schematics of the safe room's security. Mark was nervous but technically brilliant, confirming that he had installed the system. Mrs. Caldwell was obsessive about physical intrusion, Detective, Mark explained, shivering slightly. The door is bomb-proof. But her biggest fear was always privacy. She designed the room to be completely airtight and acoustically sealed during her calls. The only link to the outside world is the highly redundant air filtration and climate control unit. Thorne leaned over the diagram. Show me the air system. If the room is sealed, the air has to be managed. Where is the intake and filtration unit located? Mark pointed to a small, hidden service hatch in the outer wall of the mansion, accessible only from a rarely used utility hallway. Air is pulled from outside, filtered through a triple chemical/biological scrubber, and then pumped into the room. If the external atmosphere is contaminated, the system automatically shuts down the intake and initiates a closed-loop internal circulation. That was her safeguard. Thorne scrutinized the safeguard. If the external air was contaminated before she initiated the lockdown, and the killer knew the contaminant wouldn't register as severe enough to trip the immediate shutdown, the poison could have been introduced slowly through the filtration. Mark paled. The filter takes a few minutes to fully cycle and analyze a new compound. if the compound was slow-acting or disguised within the standard intake cycle. Yes, it's theoretically possible. But you'd need high-level access to the utility hallway, knowledge of her routine, and the specific chemical to fool the system. The complexity pointed away from a crime of passion and toward a calculated, intellectual murder, one requiring insider knowledge of Eleanor's architecture. Thorne then expanded his investigation into the suspect's access, specifically Javier, the chef, and David, the driver/butler. He confirmed Javier's routine. Javier prepared Eleanor's final herbal tea at 10:30 p.m. and delivered it to the library, near the entrance to the safe room. The tea was a common, slow-moving vector for poison. However, Javier claimed he left the tray on the library table, and Eleanor took it in herself. Thorne interviewed David, the driver. David revealed a minor but crucial detail. Mrs. Caldwell received a special delivery package just before the snow hit, a rare, custom-built air quality sensor she ordered for the filtration unit, delivered by a specialized courier. I put the package in the utility hallway, right next to the air intake hatch. Thorne's mind raced. An unknown package. A known routine. The mechanism for introducing a contaminant into the airflow was becoming horrifyingly clear. The air intake hatch was only meters away from where David left the package, and where the air was sucked in moments before purification. He ordered forensics to analyze the remnants of the package and the air filtration system's internal logs. The logs showed an anomaly. A brief 10-second surge in the nitrogen compound levels just before 11 p.m., an anomaly the system flagged as minor and corrected for, but did not shut down the intake. The surge was enough to introduce a lethal, slow-acting toxin that the filter was not designed to neutralize completely. The conclusion was chilling. The killer did not need to enter the room. The killer needed only access to the utility hallway and precise knowledge of the safe room's one architectural weakness, the very system designed to protect Eleanor. The killer was someone who knew the house intimately. This eliminated only Rosa, the general cleaner, and Sarah, the artist, with no technical knowledge. It left George, COO with full blueprints, Robert, heir with full access, Victoria, wife, possible stealth access, Mark, IT specialist, Elena, governess, knows routine/halls, Javier, chef, handled timing, and David, driver, handled the package. 7 suspects remained, each now deeply connected to the murder method. The intense pressure of the confined investigation began to break down the suspects' carefully constructed composure. Detective Thorne, relying solely on the logs and schematics trapped within the estate, knew the time for gentle questioning was over. He had the method, a lethal gas introduced via the external air intake, and now he needed the exact timing and the opportunity that connected a suspect to the specialized compound. Thorne reconvened with the forensic team, demanding a detailed analysis of the nitrogen peak in the ventilation system, registered at 22:58 the previous night. The compound is a volatile, colorless gas, likely nitrogen tetroxide or similar, the technician explained, his voice strained. Extremely volatile. The exposure, though brief, is enough to cause rapid respiratory failure. The filter neutralized it in 10 seconds, but the damage was done. The killer needed 3 things: access to the service corridor, the gas in a pressurized container, and the certainty that Eleanor would initiate the safe room lockdown at that precise moment. The access to the service corridor became the new focal point. It was a maintenance area, easily accessible for the technical team and for those who knew Eleanor's architectural layout. Thorne called Elena, the governess, who had served Eleanor for over 2 decades. Elena, whose loyalty was fractured by years of Eleanor's abuse, revealed a crucial detail. Mr. George used that corridor frequently, detective. He accessed the structural maintenance panels. He claimed only he understood the mansion's foundation. Mrs. Caldwell gave him secondary access codes for emergencies. Suspicion immediately intensified around George Caldwell, the disinherited COO, whose intimate architectural knowledge made him a prime candidate. Thorne confronted George with the secondary access logs. George admitted using the corridor but claimed it was outside the critical window. "My alibi is myself," Thorne countered dryly. But the security logs show the service corridor light was triggered by motion for 15 minutes between 22:45 and 2300 hours. 15 minutes you weren't in your room. Where were you, George? George paled, the alcohol in his system evaporating under the pressure. I was looking for an old company document Eleanor had taken. I was in the file archives. I couldn't find it, and I returned to my wing. The 15-minute lapse placed George squarely at the site of the Toxin's introduction. Simultaneously, Thorne increased the pressure on Victoria Caldwell, suspecting the affair was merely the surface of a deeper motive. He sensed the terror beneath her composed exterior. Victoria, your mother-in-law threatened to expose your affair. Why the panic? Robert would inherit Caldwell dynamics anyway, allowing you to salvage your lifestyle. Victoria finally broke, tears streaming down her carefully applied makeup. She confessed that Robert's motive was far worse than gambling debts. It wasn't just the gambling. Robert used Caldwell Dynamics accounts to embezzle millions in a tax evasion scheme. Eleanor discovered everything last week. She wasn't just going to disinherit him. She was going to turn him over to federal authorities to protect the company's image. My husband didn't just need the money. He needed her dead to avoid prison. And I needed him alive to maintain my life. Robert's and Victoria's motive escalated dramatically. It was not inheritance, it was freedom and survival. Victoria, with her social access and discretion, could have been the perfect facilitator, acting to protect her husband and her privileged life. Thorne knew he had 7 competent suspects, 2 clear opportunities: George's access, the Caldwell couple's desperation, and an established method. The next step was to find the technological fingerprint linking one of the suspects to the precise timing of the lethal gas release. The failure of Victoria's alibi gave Thorne the leverage he needed. Victoria had claimed to be with Robert in the guest house. Rosa, the cleaner, testified that Victoria was alone, talking nervously on her phone in the West Wing, a 10-minute walk from the service corridor. Thorne confronted Victoria again with the conflicting testimony. Your lie suggests you were covering for the 15 minutes George spent near the air intake, Thorne pressed, leaning over her. What were you doing in the West Wing? Trapped by her own deceit and the confined nature of the mansion, Victoria confessed to being in the West Wing, but insisted she was only talking to her lover after Eleanor's threat. She vehemently denied any knowledge of the gas or the safe room system. Thorne knew she was still holding back. He shifted his attention back to the digital domain, calling on Mark, the IT technician, to search for any communication that would link Victoria to George or to the specific gas compound. Mark, however, reported something far more critical than a simple text message. Detective, Mark announced from the security room, his face pale. I found a log of access to Mrs. Caldwell's primary desktop computer. Not a general login, a specific encrypted file transfer log. Mark explained that at 22:50, 2 minutes after the nitrogen surge began and 8 minutes before Eleanor sealed herself into the safe room, a large file containing the source codes for the proprietary ventilation system was transferred from Eleanor's computer to an unknown USB drive. Someone was using her computer at the exact moment the toxin entered the system, Mark concluded. And they took the blueprint for the murder method. Eleanor never left her computer unattended or logged in. The killer not only had to know how to introduce the gas, but also needed personal access and password knowledge to her computer at the moment of the crime, and the technical savvy to know the value of the source code. This narrowed the suspects considerably. Personal access: Robert or George, new passwords/routines of the office. Technical knowledge and physical access: George, knowledge of plan/service access, or Mark, IT expertise. Thorne then reviewed the timing. Eleanor entered the safe room at 22:58. Why would the murderer steal the ventilation source code after the gas was already introduced? The chilling realization dawned. The transfer wasn't the setup, it was the cleanup. The killer needed the source code to analyze the exact time the system registered the anomaly, ensuring their alibi was placed outside the window of opportunity. The killer was not just ruthless. They were operating with extraordinary calculation and foresight. Thorne looked at the suspects. George had the 15-minute gap and access to the utility hallway. Robert had the motive to prevent prison and likely knew his mother's current password. Victoria was the confessed liar. Mark had the technical capability to transfer the file and then potentially erase his own network logs. The simple idea of a single killer was now entirely untenable. The complexity of the crime demanded a chain of precise actions, executed by multiple individuals with different, specialized knowledge. The murder was less an opportunistic crime and more an orchestrated execution. The simultaneous demands of the crime, personal access to Eleanor's PC, knowledge of the system's flaws, and physical access to the air intake, created a terrifying truth. The Caldwell family had not just been victimized by Eleanor's cruelty, they had united against it. Thorne initiated the deep dive into the family audit server, which Mark had successfully breached. The data revealed a toxic web of shared fear, forcing the suspects to conspire out of sheer survival. The financial nexus. Robert and George Thorne presented the mirrored emails confirming their joint panic. George had been planning to sue Eleanor over his forced retirement, while Robert faced federal prison for embezzlement. They needed Eleanor gone before the board meeting. Their alliance was based on mutual financial survival. If one went down, the other would, due to interconnected business dealings. George confessed to meeting Robert briefly that week to pass on a key to a seldom-used utility closet near the air intake, claiming it was for structural inspection paperwork. The logistical nexus. Victoria and Sarah. The text logs confirmed their covert communication. Sarah, despite her public disdain for Victoria, provided the crucial logistic information. The specific, rarely used secondary service elevator code, which she had learned years ago while sneaking out. Victoria, in turn, monitored Eleanor's habits and confirmed the exact time Eleanor always retired to the safe room on Sunday nights. Their alliance was based on mutual destruction of Eleanor's control, Victoria stopping the exposure, Sarah gaining emotional freedom. Thorne established that the suspects had provided 4 critical keys. The time window. Victoria confirmed Eleanor's routine. Physical access to air intake. George provided utility closet key to the location. The means. Toxin. Javier, the chef, access to specialized chemicals for food/maintenance, though his motive remained elusive, perhaps blackmail. Digital cover. Source code. Robert, access to Eleanor's password. Thorne realized he had the full chain except for the final link. Mark, the IT expert, and Javier, the chef, who manufactured the gas, who had the expertise to ensure the filtration system wouldn't shut down entirely. He focused on Javier. The air system has a bypass valve for cleaning. Who knows the protocol? Mark confirmed. Only he and Javier, who occasionally cleaned the vents near the kitchen. Thorne questioned Javier about specialized chemicals. Javier denied having the specific compound, but admitted he was contacted last week by George asking about the utility closet's location near the air vent. The collaboration was now almost complete. The perfect crime was designed not by one genius, but by 4 desperate overlapping skills. The motive. Robert. Victoria. George. The architectural access. George. The technical skill. Mark. And the delivery. Javier, contacted by George. The murder was a collective act of self-preservation against the Matriarch's tyranny. The revelation of the shared motive and coordinated access fractured the remaining alibis. Thorne now had to solidify the roles of the 2 essential facilitators, Mark IT and Javier chef. Thorne knew the toxin, nitrogen tetroxide, was not a household item. It was used in specialized industrial cleaning processes, matching Caldwell Dynamics' industrial tech profile, but not available to a chef. However, Javier had specialized knowledge of the kitchen's advanced chemical cleaning agents. Thorne realized the toxin wasn't manufactured, but purchased using the company's name and introduced via a common delivery service. Thorne summoned David, the driver/butler. David, you mentioned an unusual package delivery just before the snow hit. The air quality sensor. Did you ever see the receipt or who signed for it? David, eager to cooperate now that the family was crumbling, remembered. It was a dark, pressurized canister. George signed for it, Detective. He said it was a specialized cleaning agent for the exterior. George was the link. He used the cover of a cleaning agent and the emergency access to bring the lethal compound into the utility corridor. He wasn't the chemist, but the logistics manager of the poison. Thorne turned to Mark, the IT technician. George may have delivered the compound, but only you knew the filtration system's threshold to ensure it wouldn't shut down immediately. And only you could have accessed Eleanor's computer to steal the source code for the cleanup. Mark, under intense pressure, finally cracked. He revealed that George, citing environmental inspection requirements, had paid him a large sum of cash to provide two things: the system's maximum nitrogen tolerance and the method to remotely transfer the ventilation source code from Eleanor's PC, which Mark had found a loophole to access years ago. Mark provided the crucial piece of evidence: the digital logs of the transaction with George. Mark's motive was simple: greed exploited by desperation. The role of Javier, the chef, was solved next. He was the lookout. Javier confirmed that George had promised him a substantial bonus to ensure the kitchen area was clear at 22:45, diverting him with a false inventory check. Javier provided the final confirmation of George's physical presence at the utility corridor. The chain was complete. The killer, the collective, led by George, logistics/access, and Robert/Victoria, motive/timing. The toxin, purchased by George. The method: George, using Mark's technical data, introduced the gas into the air intake, utility corridor. The cover-up: Mark stole the source code to perfectly align the alibis. The intricate web of betrayal had been untangled. Thorne now understood the full scope of the conspiracy, but he needed a controlled environment to present the evidence and secure the arrests before the blizzard cleared and external lawyers could complicate matters. The suspects were still trapped in the mansion, unaware he knew the full, damning extent of their collaboration. Thorne orchestrated the final setup. He announced a formal final briefing in the main living room, stating that forensic analysis had pinpointed a clear timeline, but the identity of the person who handled the final delivery of the toxin was still debated. He let the suspects believe that the blame would fall on the one who physically introduced the gas, George, while the others might escape as accessories. The goal was to make the conspirators turn on each other. Thorne focused on Robert and Victoria. Robert, your financial situation is indefensible. George's lapse places the physical delivery of the toxin squarely on him. But the federal charges against you are still severe. Your only chance for a lighter sentence is to prove you were coerced by the murderer, George, and had no active participation. Robert, terrified of prison, immediately began to distance himself from George, confirming George's desperation and his prior inquiries about utility access. Thorne then used the final psychological weapon: the revelation of the secret communication channel between Victoria and Sarah. He revealed the logs detailing their discussion of Eleanor's routine and the service elevator code. Your hatred was greater than your family loyalty, Thorne stated flatly. You provided the crucial timing, Victoria. You and Sarah set the stage. You are not just accessories. You are planners. The conspiracy fractured violently. Robert turned on Victoria for communicating with Sarah, whom he hated. Victoria turned on Sarah for giving her the service code. George, realizing his utility access made him the perfect scapegoat, turned on Robert, revealing the exact financial transaction used to purchase the toxin. The final piece of evidence came from the IT technician, Mark. Thorne ordered Mark to play the archived audio logs from the smart home system's general environment mics, timed precisely to George's 15-minute lapse in the service corridor. The audio was faint but clear, a brief hissing sound, the sound of the pressurized container being released into the vent, followed by George muttering, "God forgive me, Eleanor." The motive was solidified by the fear, the opportunity by the family's shared knowledge of the house, and the execution by cold, hard cash and betrayal of trust. The sound of George's muffled voice, confessing the final act to a silent microphone, brought the chaotic confrontation to a dead stop. George collapsed, his elaborate alibis crumbling into dust. Thorne stepped back, allowing the weight of the evidence to crush the conspirators. He did not need a full confession. He had the motive, prison/ruin, the logistics, George's access/utility key, the technical data, Mark's codes, and the delivery method, the hiss of the gas. Thorne laid out the final verdict, not just of guilt, but of the depth of Eleanor's control. The perfect crime was a desperate act of collective self-preservation. Eleanor Caldwell created the system, but her own tyranny provided the perfect murderers. He detailed the roles. George Caldwell, the logistics manager. He purchased the Toxin, used his architectural access to introduce the gas, and was the direct executor of the lethal mechanism. Robert and Victoria Caldwell, the instigators. Their fear of federal prison provided the central financial motive and the political pressure for the crime's timing. Sarah Caldwell, the provider of intelligence. Her emotional freedom required Eleanor's death, and she provided the crucial access codes and timing knowledge. Mark, IT technician, the technical facilitator. He sold the information on the filtration system's flaw and provided the digital cover-up, stealing the source code. Javier, chef, the witness/accessory. He provided the necessary clear window in the service area. Thorne secured the arrests. George, Robert, Victoria, Sarah, and Mark were all charged, some as executors, others as conspirators and accessories. The wealth of the Caldwell estate, the very thing everyone was fighting for, was frozen, set to be seized by federal and state agencies, leaving nothing but ruin behind. The blizzard, having held the secret captive, began to subside. The roads were slowly becoming passable. The blizzard lifted late that Tuesday afternoon, revealing a landscape of pristine white. Detective Thorne watched the Caldwells, the remnants of a powerful toxic family, being led out of the Manseo Omega, their expensive cashmere and silk now utterly meaningless against the cold efficiency of law enforcement. Thorne stood alone in the mahogany study, the place where Eleanor had exercised her control and where her family had signed their collective death warrants. The case was solved not by a lucky break, but by understanding the deep, fatal flaw in Eleanor's architecture. Her belief that money and paranoia could control human fear and desperation. The perfect crime, the sealed room, was solved because the murder weapon wasn't a gun. It was the system itself, designed by the victim and weaponized by the four desperate people she sought to control. Thorne left Lake Shore Haven, knowing the true legacy of the Caldwells was not their wealth, but the catastrophic web of betrayal they wove. The price of their survival was total destruction. The blizzard provided the setting, but Eleanor Caldwell's tyranny provided the motive. The murder in Omega Mansion was an act of mutual survival, where the safe room became the weapon of everyone she tried to control. The final verdict was not just arrest, but the collapse of the entire Caldwell legacy, the price they paid for trading loyalty for greed and fear. Eleanor's story proved that the strongest structure can be demolished by the betrayal of those who hold the key. What about you? If you were under Eleanor's pressure, facing imminent prison or social ruin, would you have participated in the conspiracy? Or would you have surrendered to your fate? Leave your answer in the comments. If you love locked room mysteries and psychological twists, hit the like button and subscribe for more dramatic paths.